Hey everyone, welcome back to my channel. So after Novak Djokovic travelled to Australia to compete in the Australian Open, he was stopped at Melbourne Airport and they said that his visa application was not valid. All the papers that he had been given from Tennis Australia were not valid. So he was in hotel quarantine detention for the night and basically the whole day today, and his legal team are trying to work out how they're going to challenge this. We're going to take a look at the updated information from my previous video where I went through basically everything that just happened initially, but now we have a lot more details and a few more athletes competing at the Australian Open have apparently had the same exemption, so it's not just Novak. Alright, so starting off with Chris O'Keefe, who I referenced in my last video. He's a political reporter at 9 News. Now, he said a photo of Novak Djokovic was sent to him by someone, and this is Novak in Melbourne at Tullamarine Airport talking to the Australian Border Force official. Now, let's take a look at what Chris O'Keefe had to say. So Chris O'Keefe said, "This is Djokovic at Melbourne Airport last night. I've spoken to the man who took this photo. He says Novak showed a bundle of papers to Border Force with Tennis Australia logos on it. It feels to me Djokovic legitimately felt like he had an exemption thanks to Tennis Australia." So according to this person who told Chris O'Keefe from 9 that he saw Djokovic there and he took that photo, he said he saw a bundle of papers that he gave to Border Force with Tennis Australia logos on it. So Djokovic obviously believed that Tennis Australia sorted everything out for him and got him that exemption. Now, when you're talking about the bungle that's gone on between Tennis Australia and the Victorian government and the Australian Commonwealth government, federal government, there's a few things that have gone on, and the PM did a conference today addressing it, but we thought it could have been, because he's in Victoria, it could have been a Victorian issue, but that's not what we've been told, because the Victorian Health Minister, Martin Foley, he said on TV, I'm going to quote, "Someone issued Novak Djokovic a visa and it wasn't the Victorian government." There you go. So in regards to his legal bid, this is Paul Sarkar from The Age down in Melbourne. He said Novak Djokovic's legal bid adjourned till Monday, just a week before the first match in the Australian Open. Djokovic will remain in Australia over the weekend and he'll stay probably in that detention hotel. So Paul Sarkar's been all over it today because he was the one also said the legal bid to overturn the visa ruling was to be heard at 4 o'clock today, and then they delayed it to 6 o'clock, and then this came out at 6:42. It was adjourned till Monday. So it's going to be Friday, Saturday, Sunday, so he's going to have 3 days off, and then the legal team's going to try and get everything sorted for a Monday hearing. We'll see what they come up with on Monday, and if this thing gets overturned. I don't think it's a likely chance, but who knows? We'll see what happens on Monday. Moving on, interesting things have happened on the diplomatic side because the Serbian president decries Novak Djokovic harassment amid reaction to visa cancellation. Alexander Vucic says the whole of Serbia is backing tennis player as debate rages over Australia's handling of COVID vaccine exemption saga. The Serbian president has accused Australia of maltreatment because Novak Djokovic, obviously Serbian tennis player, so Serbian president, who was denied entry to the country after he flew into Melbourne with a medical exemption from coronavirus vaccination rules. In my last video, I said there was a couple of panels that had to go through this, that had to approve this exemption. Now, it says he was granted a controversial exemption to enter Australia and compete in the Australian Open, but was held up at Melbourne Airport by authorities, which we saw, for several hours before his visa was cancelled. So he was held there, I think, for about 8 hours for questioning, because he flew in just before midnight on Wednesday, like Tuesday night, Wednesday morning. So midnight Wednesday, had about 8 hours of questioning and then got sent off to that detention hotel. And that was several hours before his visa was cancelled. The Australian Border Force said he had failed to provide adequate evidence to support his exemption, and the player has now taken his case to court. But I said before, he probably legitimately believed that he, after handing all these papers from Tennis Australia to the Border Force, he probably believed that he was exempt. But what the Border Force said was, no, it's not adequate evidence. Now, I got some clips of the Prime Minister, Scott Morrison, talking about Djokovic's issue, and there was a few key details in it that we're going to go through. So let's take a look.
Rules are rules. It's what I said to you yesterday.
So he said, rules are rules.
I want to thank the Australian Border Force officers for doing their job, implementing the government's policy.
So this is what the Border Force's statement was. So the ABF can confirm that Mr. Djokovic failed to provide appropriate evidence to meet the entry requirements to Australia, and his visa has been subsequently cancelled. That was what the Australian Border Force had to say.
Entry with a visa requires double vaccination or a medical exemption.
And then going off the back of that, the Border Force said non-citizens who do not hold a valid visa on entry or who have had their visa cancelled will be detained and removed from Australia. So Djokovic believed he had the exemption requirements because he had all those papers from Tennis Australia, which he gave to the Border Force. And then what this is saying is if the visa doesn't hold up, if it's not valid, or if it's cancelled, which they did to him, they revoked the visa, he'll be detained, which is currently being detained now, and will be removed from Australia, which he'll be deported. Right now, the legal team is currently trying to work out how they're going to proceed with this. So they've got that adjournment until Monday. But if his legal team wasn't working on it, he would have been kicked out. They were talking about, even today, they were talking about removing him from the country and sending him back to Europe somewhere today or even tonight. But luckily for him, his legal team's got to adjourn till Monday. Let's continue.
Such an exemption was not in place, and as a result, he is subject to the same rule as anyone else. This is nothing about any one individual. It is simply a matter of following the rules.
He says it's not a matter of one individual, but it has come out that there is an ongoing investigation with other unvaccinated tennis players. And the Home Affairs Minister said that Border Force is investigating reports of unvaccinated tennis players who have already entered the country. So if they're going to turn back Novak Djokovic, the #1 player in the world, they're going to have to look into seriously about how these other players came in unvaccinated and if their visas are all legitimate. As it says here, the cancellation of Djokovic's visa has seen reports emerge of other unvaccinated tennis players who have successfully entered the country with an exemption. Home Affairs Minister Karen Andrews told Mark Levy the Australian Border Force is investigating. It may well be that everyone who has come into the country has the correct documentation. If the evidence is not there, then we'll take the appropriate action. And then it comes out, ABC just posted this. Australian Border Force officials are investigating another player and an official who were granted medical exemptions by Tennis Australia. There's another player and an official, so 2 people who they've identified that were granted medical exemptions. So obviously they're going to do the investigation in them and then see if they might be subject to deportation by the Australian Border Force.
If you're not double vaccinated and you're not an Australian resident or citizen, well, you can't come.
So if those 2 that have been identified aren't vaccinated, then it's like, double standard. Now, Scott Morrison, the Prime Minister, is going to talk about how Tennis Australia communicated with Novak Djokovic and how he thought he had done the right thing. But there was also a communique from November that was saying this.
And in relation to any advice he may have received from Tennis Australia, well, the letter makes very clear that was written back to Tennis Australia in November. People must be fully vaccinated as defined by the ATAGI to gain quarantine-free entry into Australia. This means that people who do not meet the ATAGI definition of fully vaccinated will not be approved for quarantine-free entry, regardless of whether they have received foreign vaccine exemption. From the Minister for Health, I can confirm that people who contracted COVID-19 within the past 6 months and seek to enter Australia from overseas and have not received 2 doses of a TGA-approved or TGA-recognised vaccine are not considered fully vaccinated.
So what he was saying there is that, what I said before, Novak Djokovic probably thought that his exemption counted because in Europe, they have that 6 months period where if you've had COVID in the prior 6 months, they count that as equivalent to being double vaccinated. But in Australia, that's not the case. And even though he's saying he had COVID, it's not really the past 6 months. I think it was in June that he had COVID. So that's getting to 7 months now. So even if he tried to claim that, it still probably wouldn't count. But the health minister said, no, people who don't have the vaccine can't come in. That's just it. So one of the journalists asked him about the Serbian president and his comments about harassment of Novak Djokovic.
Australia has sovereign borders and clear rules that are non-discriminatory, and as so many other countries do. It has nothing to do with those issues. It just has to do with the fair and reasonable application of Australia's border protection laws.
So that was the Prime Minister there, Scott Morrison, talking about Novak Djokovic and his situation. He could have been sent back to Serbia later on Thursday, which was tonight, unless his lawyers can stop the deportation, which they have done. Professor of Public Law at University of Sydney, Mary Crock, said that hotel was now classified as a detention centre. So technically, Novak Djokovic is in a detention centre in Australia, in Melbourne. So he'll stay there until he's either granted a visa or removed from the country, and that will depend on the application he makes to the federal court, which will be decided on Monday. So at the moment, that's where we're at with Djokovic. So he thought he had a visa, an exemption to come into Australia because he had all his documentation from Tennis Australia, which we saw the photo here. But the Border Force said, no, that's not sufficient evidence. Prime Minister said it's not sufficient evidence. The Serbian president is talking about harassment of Novak Djokovic, how the whole country of Serbia is standing behind him. There have been other people now who are being investigated for the same medical exemptions by Tennis Australia. And Novak Djokovic will have his hearing on Monday to decide whether he will be deported from Australia. And if that is the case, he will not compete in the Australian Open and he will miss out on a chance to take 21 Grand Slam titles, which is one more than both of Federer and Nadal. So that's where we're at, and I'll bring you more when it comes to light. So let me know your thoughts in the comments below. Don't forget to smash the like button, subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. Share this video out there, and I'll see you in the next one.